Our next keynote speaker is a trailblazer for Chinese Americans in public service in the United States. As a third-generation immigrant with ties to Guangdong, he enjoys many firsts. First Chinese American governor of a U.S. state, first Chinese American Secretary of Commerce, first U.S. ambassador to China of Chinese descent. He is currently chairman of the Committee of 100, a co-organizer of our event today. As a fellow Committee 100 member, I'm delighted to introduce to you Ambassador Gary Locke.
Thank you very much, Eric, for that really nice introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and all the esteemed guests gathered in person in Shanghai this morning. And I noticed that there are several hundred in attendance there in Shanghai. And good afternoon and good evening to those in the United States and elsewhere joining via live stream, almost some 500 people. I'm truly honored and delighted to join you today via Zoom to commemorate this 50th anniversary of the historic signing of the Shanghai Communique. I want to thank Eric Jun and the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai and the National Committee on U.S. China Relations for co-hosting this event with the Committee of 100. It's a testament to the theme of collaboration that we are all celebrating today. I also want to give special thanks and acknowledgement to former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who just spoke a few minutes ago, whose pivotal role and leadership 50 years ago is why we're here today. Secretary Kissinger has been a longtime friend and supporter of Committee of 100 and is a seminal figure in promoting U.S.-China relations these past 50 years. More than 30 years ago, Committee of 100 was formed at the urging of Dr. Henry Kissinger as a means of advancing positive relations between the United States and China, as well as furthering the inclusion and advancement of the now nearly 6 million Chinese Americans here in the United States. And as Eric indicated, I'm honored to serve as the chair of this wonderful nonprofit organization. And I feel honored and privileged to have been with Dr. Kissinger at events in China, celebrating the various milestones in the U.S.-China relationship, as well as receiving his wise counsel in many one-on-one meetings that I will always treasure. For those who are students of the history of U.S.-China relations, the 1970s stand as one of the most pivotal and fascinating decades. At the center of it all is the Shanghai Communique, connecting the past to the present, and indeed the present to the future. Even though the United States and China didn't formally recognize each other until 1979, the Shanghai Communique, issued 7 years earlier in February 1972 by President Richard Nixon and Premier Zhou Enlai, at the end of an historic week-long visit to China by President Nixon, was a crucial event that paved the way for both countries to work towards the normalization of relations after more than 20 years of isolation and no formal contact, as even Madame Zhou remarked. Students of history know, of course, that the signing of the Shanghai Communique itself was preceded by what we now call ping pong diplomacy, when Chinese and American table tennis players struck up a friendship at the World Table Tennis Championship in Nagoya, Japan in 1971. That friendship, captured in news photographs and headlines, prompted Chinese leader Mao Zedong to invite the American table tennis team to visit China, which they did in April 1971, marking the first time an official American delegation had set foot on Chinese soil since 1949. That serendipitous moment of friendship between Chinese and American athletes provided a crucial opening that government officials took full advantage of. Both the United States and China had their strategic reasons then for seeing rapprochement with the other. But with the way eased by sports and friendly competition, in July 1971, then Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, Henry Kissinger, while on a trip to Pakistan, took a secret trip to Beijing to meet with Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai. And he gifted Premier Zhou with a rock from the 1969 Apollo 11 trip to the moon. Premier Zhou and Henry Kissinger conducted almost nonstop meetings over 2.5 days. Their candid conversations about mutual interests, but also disagreements between the two countries, laid the core foundation for what would become the Shanghai Communique. When President Nixon finally landed in Beijing in February of 1972, February 21, we're exactly almost 50 years ago, for his week-long visit, a new era in relations between America and China ushered forth. Today, we are all the beneficiaries of that historic week that changed the world. Since then, almost a half a century after the normalization of relations between the United States and China, the connections and ties between the peoples of the United States and China have become so deeply embedded in every aspect of our societies that it's hard to imagine or remember a time when there was no contact. From the last 40 plus years of the U.S. China trade helping to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, the most dramatic social and economic transformation the world has ever seen, to recent Chinese foreign direct investment creating more than 2 million jobs in America, from scientific, educational, and cultural exchanges enriching both countries, and even to the most recent example of at least 3 Chinese American Winter Olympic athletes, all born in the United States to immigrant parents from China, but who were able to exercise their freedom of choice as to what country to compete for in the recent Winter Olympics. Our two countries are inextricably intertwined. Of course, the world today is very different from that of 50 years ago. Today's world is smaller in so many ways. And technological change, innovation, scientific progress, while supremely beneficial to humankind, have also resulted in uncertainty and insecurity for many. The last 2 years of a once-in-a-lifetime global pandemic has also caused great anxiety and turmoil. During these times of great flux and rapid change, increasingly louder voices in both countries have been calling for decoupling, withdrawal, and isolation. It has become popular and far too easy to blame or demonize the other, to sow fear, and to exacerbate and exploit differences, rather than finding a way to bridge those differences or finding a way forward despite those differences. In America, over the past 2 years, Chinese Americans and Asian Americans have been the target of an unprecedented number of anti-Asian violent crimes and harassment, due in no small measure to the false and inflammatory rhetoric scapegoating and blaming the Asian community for the coronavirus, which former President Trump called the China virus. Ethnic Chinese students and researchers in America have also become caught in the dragnet of geopolitical tensions and suspicions between the United States and China, painted with a dangerous broad brush stereotyping that people of Chinese descent are not to be trusted. Yet it is precisely during these times of fear, anxiety, and division that we have to redouble our efforts to come together, to lower tensions, and to work together within our own nations, but also across the oceans between our nations. Because what the last few years have shown us is that the world has grown so complex, and that the US and China have never been more intertwined or needed to work together than ever before. Whether on global health, scientific and medical advances, world poverty, nuclear non-proliferation, or climate change, all of which affect the entire planet, the entire world, all of humanity. The world is looking for leadership from both China and the United States working together to solve these global issues. Of course, frictions and tensions in any relationship are unavoidable. with some fundamental differences between the United States and China, recognized even then by Mr. Kissinger and Premier Zhou Enlai, between President Nixon and Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong. Relations between the two countries have seen their share of successes and failures, cooperation and disagreements. But the relationship has endured and evolved through multiple administrations in both the United States and China. Because at the end of the day, it has been of mutual benefit to both sides and to the world. But the future is not guaranteed. How our children and grandchildren will judge us 20 or 50 years from now will depend on what we do today and how we choose to go forward. We would do well to look back and let history be our guide. The passage of time can sometimes make it seem as if an historical event were a foregone conclusion. But those who were intimately involved in it at that time know that the smallest thing could have resulted in a very different outcome entirely. Had the table tennis athletes not approached each other in friendship rather than acrimony, history might have turned out very differently. Had news of Secretary Kissinger's secret trip to Beijing leaked, or had Secretary Kissinger and Premier Zhou not been willing to commit all those hours to respectful, constructive dialogue, we might not be here today at all. Reading the Shanghai Communique, and I urge everyone to do so, it is really one of the most remarkable and creative documents in U.S. diplomacy. Both sides laid out some of their most extreme ideological positions in social systems and foreign policy. There was no whitewashing of positions. Both sides disagreed on some fundamental ideological positions. But the two countries agreed that they could disagree and that they should conduct themselves based on principles of respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, and that neither would seek hegemony in the Asia-Pacific region. These are principles that our modern-day leaders and politicians should re-examine. It is precisely this principle of seeking common ground while respecting differences that the Committee of 100 has been practicing and advocating for all of our 30+ years of existence. And we still firmly believe in those principles, all while we continue to promote positive and constructive engagement between the peoples of the United States and China. Ladies and gentlemen, 50 years after the signing of the Shanghai Communiqué, I believe the impetus of mutual interest still holds. Where the U.S.-China relationship is headed is still to be determined. But if history has taught us anything, it is that even in the darkest of times, if both sides are willing and determined, change and breakthroughs are possible. 50 years ago, it took courage, clarity, and creativity on the part of everyone, athletes, politicians, statesmen, and ordinary citizens, to bring about positive change, to embrace the new, to imagine the impossible. Today, these same qualities are required of each and every one of us who cares about the future of the U.S.-China relations and indeed the future of humanity. Who is to say that a friendship started today between a person from America and a person from China, rooted in mutual respect for the humanity and dignity of each other, maybe over dim sum lunch with, in Cantonese, we call it cha siu bao, won't be the seed that sparks cooperation and a transformational endeavor or discovery and positive change for the future. As Dr. Kissinger himself noted, quote, "The relationship between the two countries is the key element for peace in the world," unquote. Despite the current tensions and disagreements, despite our very real differences in the United States and China, we must find a way to coexist peacefully and work together constructively. Only together can we ensure that the next 50 years and beyond is an era marked by peace, progress, and prosperity for all. Thank you very much.